The Department of Defense today said it is launching a thorough review into Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, citing serious allegations of misconduct. The announcement comes just days after Donald Trump accused Mark Kelly and other Democratic lawmakers of seditious behavior for a video in which they said the U.S. service members should refuse illegal orders. In a statement on X, the Department of Defense, or Department of War as they now like to be known, said it received serious allegations of misconduct against Kelly, who is a retired U.S. Navy captain and a U.S. astronaut as well, I might point out. Emily Galvin Almanza, these threats that are coming from the executive towards members of Congress are akin to the types of things you would expect to hear out of an authoritarian regime. I mean, does that not really confirm that we are actually living under an authoritarian regime now?
It's really the up is down, wrong is right reversal of reality that makes it so notably a George Orwell characteristic. Because in the video, which I reviewed, everyone was very careful and clear that they were telling military members that they should refuse illegal orders, which of course the Uniform Code of Military Justice also says that they should refuse illegal orders that are unconstitutional, that contravene U.S. law, that contravene international law and treaties. The video was explicit that this was not a call to disregard any order they were given. It was literally just a restatement of what the law is. So for the administration to literally reverse what the video actually said and accuse the people who participated in the video of calling for unlawful action to refuse fully lawful orders is authoritarian because it assumes that people will listen to the voice of the executive branch over their own ears.
Should we just for a moment talk about why these lawmakers decided to make this video? I mean, as I see it, it's because of Trump's behavior towards Venezuela, for example. There's a kind of fear that they've now sent an aircraft carrier there and military equipment there, and the Venezuelans are saying, you're trying to bring about regime change and using kind of narcotics as the excuse for that. But also there's these boats that have been shot at in international waters, killing almost 100 people now. These are in direct contravention of international law. And yet Donald Trump has again found a little legal loophole to think that he can get away with executing people, murdering them, no arrest, no detainment, no trial, no due process. So should we just talk to that first? That is part of the reason why these senators stepped up and said, really the law should come first.
I mean, these senators are restating something that is absolutely necessary for every military member to understand. We have seen a proliferation of things of dubious legality. And I say dubious because, of course, they are being litigated. Obviously, attacks on Venezuelan boats. It's very hard to understand how these comport with any law. If we were at war with Venezuela, Congress would have to have declared that war. If we were believing these boats to be drug traffickers, then under our own law, drug traffickers don't get the death penalty. You cannot just summarily execute a person who has been accused, credibly or not, of carrying or transporting narcotics. We have a process. The process is apprehension, arrest, accusation, formal indictment, a trial, like all of these things that we do to test the veracity of accusations, which of course are frequently wrong. You don't need to be that old in this country to remember multiple times when our government has gotten it wrong or where the intelligence on an issue of international importance was wrong. So there's a reason the law doesn't allow the executive branch to summarily execute its enemies. But even going beyond the situation in the Caribbean, currently we are litigating the legality of dispatching the National Guard in the way that the federal government is attempting to utilize the National Guard to either back up federal law enforcement or maybe just pick up trash in DC, and maybe it's violating posse comitatus and maybe it's just a really awful guard assignment. I don't know. But the point is, That dubiousness of legality puts military members in a terrible situation. And the reason it's a terrible situation is the responsibility in the military to follow the law is somewhat individual. Orders are presumed to be lawful, but if they turn out not to be lawful, the responsibility for having followed them and having partaken in unlawful activity is individual. However, the military member who understands that they're being asked to do something of dubious legality and thinks that perhaps it is an unlawful order and that they shouldn't follow it, doesn't have any way of finding out in advance. There's not like a hotline you can call and say, hey, can you tell me one way or another if, is this order lawful or unlawful? Unfortunately, the way the law is set up is that a military member would have to disobey that order, be court-martialed, and then find out through that legal process, through the court-martial proceeding, whether in fact the order was lawful or unlawful. So the people who are really having a hard time right now are the people who are in the military.
Mark Kelly heard that this investigation was happening on social media. He wasn't even directly told. Now we hear the FBI has requested interviews with these 6 Democratic members of Congress who took part in the video. The Pentagon said it was investigating one of the lawmakers, Arizona Senator, former Navy Captain Mark Kelly, for violating military law by appearing in the video. Kelly's called the DOD announcement an act of intimidation. I should mention who the other senators are. All Democrats: Senator Elisa Slotkin, House Representatives Maggie Goodlander, Jason Crow, Chrissy Houlihan, and Chris Deluzio. All senior military people or have worked in the security services, and so, they're not doing this out of spite. They're not doing this because they don't know the law. They're doing this to remind service personnel, I presume, that the Constitution comes before the president's orders. Do you think that that is something that the military want to decide for themselves? I mean, the military is a very top-down organization, isn't it? Yeah. And it relies on getting orders that have been checked and double-checked.
Yeah, nobody in their right mind would want to have a job where you may or may not end up in prison because you can't necessarily trust what you're being told to do. And if you make the wrong call on it, one, it's a matter of life or death, or potentially could be a matter of life or death. And 2, it could be a matter of your own future freedom. So no one would want to be in that position. And that's why it's been so important over the years that as a nation, as a government, the checks and balances are set up such that people who are serving in the armed forces or serving in the intelligence community can be confident that what they are being told to do is legal. Has that always worked out? No, absolutely not. Look at, Abu Ghraib and the atrocities that we know have been carried out on the orders of U.S. military officials over the years. That being said, we're in a very particular period right now where we have an executive branch that has embraced a sort of let's see if they stop me mentality. And that let's see if they stop me mentality is terrifying from the perspective of someone who is relying on someone else's judgment about what is or is not legal. I mean, we see this manifesting in almost every single legal proceeding that involves the executive branch and that hits the news these days. Like from contempt proceedings under Judge Boasberg for potentially having lied about whether an aircraft had or had not departed or where it was. I mean, lying to a federal judge, potentially. That's going to be determined in contempt proceedings in that court. Or potentially dispatching the military unlawfully. The actions of ICE that we see every day, which, I am not a military attorney. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I can speak on criminal defense, civil rights, and our constitutional protections. And I can say those videos we're seeing of ICE routinely are the violation of people's constitutional protections. After all, constitutional protections apply to any person in the United States, not just any citizen. So again and again, I mean, down to having accidentally invaded Mexico. Did you hear that we accidentally invaded Mexico? Our Department of War went down there and put a bunch of signs on the beach that said you can't come here because it's our... By the way, signing the signs, the Department of Defense. Apparently they didn't update the stationery. But when you're in the military and you're relying on a guy who may or may not have accidentally invaded Mexico to give you good orders, and your future and your family relies on those orders. It's a terrible position to be in, and I'm happy to see other members of government stepping up to remind people what the law does and does not allow.
Don Bacon, the outgoing Republican congressman from Nebraska, who's established himself as a more moderate voice within the GOP, said that the Pentagon's investigation into Senator Mark Kelly is evidence of amateur hour at the department. He said, "I thought the video by 6 Dems was unnecessary and foolish, but the threats of sedition charges and court-martials in response are also crazy." He said, "Let's show some common sense and restraint," referring to the president's posts on Truth Social. And this is the other thing. You know, Trump has started kind of posting a deranged stream of consciousness on Truth Social. There's a couple of problems here as I see it. One, you know, if you invite a convicted felon into the kind of most powerful seat in the land, you're going to have him behaving like a criminal. And so much of his directives are done with that kind of criminal mindset of retribution. And well, you know, I also think for years, because the DOJ, in his mind, were against him, he is now taking full advantage of the opportunity to kind of use them to his advantage. But he does have the mindset of a criminal, and so therefore it's hard for us to kind of analyze him because we don't necessarily think in those terms.
Okay, we're going to have to back up because you're like inches from phrenology here. So let's be clear. There are lots of people in this country with criminal records, felony records, who have served time in prison, who I would 100% trust to be in that seat in the White House more than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
What makes Donald Trump dangerous to the future of this country, to the present of this country, to the people of this country, to the people who live in this country, is not his criminal record or any such thing as a criminal mindset. Because I think that really undersells the danger of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I understand.
There are so many people who are leaders in business, in politics, in security, in defense, in tech, who routinely engage in what my dad would sort of term some kind of satisfaction of getting away with it, right? There are people who are accustomed to seeing how far they can push the line in business, in their personal relationships, etc. How many, what's that old joke from the Chappelle Show? He's a habitual line stepper, right? There are people who derive pleasure from transgression. I don't think this has anything to do with criminalization. It has to do with an abandonment of the moral duties of public office. And there are so many people in government who have never been convicted of a crime who have absolutely abandoned the moral duties of public office. And I think we have to separate the two, because when you don't, what you're doing is denigrating hundreds of thousands of people while not precisely stating the problem.
So Trump is actually kind of way lower than your average criminal on the pecking order in terms of his ability to kind of do the job, because there is so much there. I mean, obviously now people are talking about his mental health and the dementia and the aging and the various other issues that would consider him a threat to the US and the rest of the world. But this is far more calculated, this idea of retribution. He said this on the campaign trail, that he was going to go after his enemies. And we've seen this with James Comey and Letitia James. You know, two arguably upstanding public civil workers who are, like them or loathe them. They really do try to do things by the book. And in Comey's case, maybe more so than is even necessary. And Trump has gone after them in such a way that it's actually his own incompetence and the incompetence of the Department of Justice that has had those cases thrown out.
Well, it's greed for a result is really what it is, and not knowing how stuff works.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you feel that you hold ultimate authority and power and are beholden to no one and no one else's processes touch yours, if you're the kind of person who would unleash Doge or sick troops on his own people, you're not the kind of person who takes the time to understand how stuff works. And so in these cases, what we really see is cases that are so weak, no prosecutor who was working in government at the time Trump initially wanted to bring these cases would touch them with a 10-foot pole. And this is because prosecutors have a unique ethical duty. Most lawyers have an ethical duty only to their client, and they have to serve their client's interests. But prosecutors have an ethical duty to do justice. Do I think they always live up to it? No, I literally wrote a book on all of the ways in which our system doesn't do that. People can check it out in February if they want. But in general, prosecutors are supposed to look at cases with a trained eye and a certain level of skepticism and an understanding of their, ethical authority and discretion. So the administration had a couple of cases that they really, really wanted to have prosecuted, and no legitimate prosecutor would do it. And so they wanted to bring in someone who would do it. Now, normally if you want to bring in a successive interim attorney in this role, it's something you're really supposed to run by the Senate. But this is a breaking things and moving fast administration, so they don't do it. They put in place someone whose background was in insurance law, and she might be the best lawyer in the world. I don't know. I don't know anything about her practice. But I do know that to become someone who is capable of practicing at the highest level in a field you've never practiced, and if someone asked me tomorrow to go do the highest level insurance law, I would absolutely fail. Because it's not my field. It's not what I trained to do. And you can't learn everything from a book. There's a lot of stuff you just have to learn through experience. So to put somebody in there who made these potentially really catastrophic unconstitutional errors, or who's, allegedly made these potential errors in front of the grand jury, and then be surprised when the appointment process itself was so illegitimate that the whole thing gets tossed, it's a little bit rich. It's an object lesson in why there are, in fact, limits on power, and you do, in fact, have to know how things work, and you cannot just run roughshod over the entire criminal court system.
The DOJ says it's going to appeal these decisions, but the James Comey case has now run its course because they filed the day before the statute of limitations was up. Is that right?
Maybe. So according to his counsel, that will absolutely be the argument that they make. The case was dismissed without prejudice. So there are times when you can find wiggle room. There may be tolling of the statute of limitations. It really depends on what the court decides to do when they attempt to refile. Because basically they will attempt to refile the case and re-indict the case. And Comey's lawyers will assert that the statute of limitations has run. And then it will be up to the judge to decide whether there is a justification for having essentially hit pause on that statute of limitations. I actually don't know what the outcome will be here. I think that the Comey legal team sounds very confident that they're going to win on the statute of limitations issue, but I've been surprised enough by judges to not place a wager.
Mark Kelly said, I said something that was pretty simple and non-controversial, and that was that members of the military should follow the law. And in response to that, Donald Trump said that I should be executed. A reminder, the president accused the Democrats who took part in the video of seditious behavior, adding that it was punishable by death in a string of posts to Truth Social. Kelly said we wanted to remind folks that they need to comply with the law and be reminded and also explain to members of the military that we have their backs and we know what's going on as part of our job, accountability over the federal government. And this is the response we get, Kelly said. I don't think there's anything more patriotic than standing up for the Constitution. And right here, right now, this week, the president is clearly not doing that. This intimidation that extended to calling for the execution of these senators, again, we're getting into kind of mental health territory here. Trump is literally nuts posting this stuff, and there is nobody to stop him. And it seems, the respect for the office seems to have fallen by the wayside. There was a time when presidents, they never swore publicly. Well, he breaks with that convention all the time. And, to the extent now that he's inviting Saudi princes into the Oval Office and the Syrian leader as well, and spraying him with cologne. Just weird stuff that we would never normally expect to see out of the Oval Office, not to mention turning the Oval Office into some kind of Kremlin-style palace with kind of gold everywhere. This is clearly a shift. Trump does see himself as not just the commander-in-chief, but the chief law enforcement officer and also the executioner. And talk about power going to somebody's head. In the first Trump presidency, there were senior people who were there prepared to hold him back. This is what it looks like to see Trump unleashed, as well as being a little older and a little crazier. So finally, let's just talk about this threat of executions and punishable by death and this type of stuff. I mean, how seriously should we take it when the president actually says this stuff out loud?
We should take it seriously as an indication of the president's stability, mental health, judgment, ability to be the person you want to have in the Situation Room. Like, as a political matter, we should take it very seriously. As a legal matter, if I were Mark Kelly, I would not be terribly worried right now. It feels to me that the likelihood of a military tribunal evaluating very, very mild statements that, again, are statements of what the law says, which is that it is incumbent upon members of the military to not obey unlawful, unconstitutional, law-breaking, illegal orders. It is incumbent upon them to presume that orders are lawful, but then you use their brain and think about it. The likelihood of a military tribunal finding any crime in a video which restates the law, as much as it might have rankled, the executive branch politically, seems to me to be extremely low. However, when we look at the state of mind of a person who, as you point out, has decided that the Oval Office should look like the inside of a Fabergé egg, we should take serious political lessons from the types of threats he is willing to issue, because those are the measure of how far outside the norm we really are, how far away from the norms we once had we really are. And again, for members of the military to look to their commander-in-chief and see the commander-in-chief threatening death on, former members of the military and retired members of the military who are attempting to say something that is true. Let's keep in mind, there's an alternative reality here, which is that members of the military receive an order, that order is in fact illegal, that they follow it, and then they are held responsible, because of course we all know that the Nuremberg defense is not a defense at all. You can't say I was just following orders. So this is a number of senior individuals speaking to folks who are in a state of great uncertainty, reminding them that there is peril in the other direction as well. So when you compare the responsibility that these individuals have taken upon themselves to give people good and lawful information, and you compare that to screeching about death on Truth Social, like, who's the person you'd rather have giving the orders that are life and death?
Emily's book, The Price of Mercy, Unfair Trials, A Violent System and a Public Defender's Search for Justice in America, is released in February. You can pre-order it now. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.